The morning began softly, like a slow song the world had almost forgotten to play. The air inside the small house was still and calm.
Where did you find him?
A clock ticked gently on the wall, each sound echoing through the quiet kitchen. Outside, the sun rose slowly, painting golden lines across the floor. Amara stood near the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Steam rose and touched her face, blurring her reflection in the glass. She looked older than she remembered. Her eyes carried a certain tired peace, and faint lines curved at their corners. She smiled at herself, but it was a small, hesitant smile. One that didn't quite reach her eyes. The radio hummed softly in the background. An old love song playing from a station she didn't even remember tuning into. The melody made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. She leaned on the counter and whispered under her breath, "Maybe I'm just getting old." She didn't expect anyone to hear it, but the front door creaked. Ethan's voice came through, low and warm. "You call this old? I'd call it peaceful." Amara turned around with surprise, though a small part of her had already known it was him. Ethan lived next door. He had been her neighbor for years since she moved into the house after her divorce. He often stopped by in the mornings, sometimes with tools to fix something, other times just to check in, pretending it was about her leaky faucet or broken porch light. "Don't you ever knock?" she asked, smiling despite herself. "I did," he said, grinning as he raised a small paper bag. "You were too lost in thought. Brought you something from the bakery." She took the bag, the smell of fresh bread filling the room. "You spoil me," she said. "Someone has to," he replied casually. But his eyes lingered on her face a second too long. Amara tried to ignore the warmth that rose in her chest. She sat down at the small kitchen table, motioning for him to join her. He did, the chair creaking as he leaned back comfortably. They ate quietly for a few moments. The sound of birds came from outside, mixing with the faint hum of the refrigerator. There was peace in the silence between them. An unspoken understanding that neither needed to fill the air with words. After a while, Amara broke the silence. "Do you ever think about getting old?" Ethan chuckled. "Only when my back reminds me." She smiled, shaking her head. "I mean, really old. When your face changes. When your body changes. When you don't quite feel like yourself anymore." He tilted his head, studying her expression. "That's a strange question for someone who looks perfectly fine to me." "Perfectly fine," she repeated with a soft laugh. "Ethan, I looked in the mirror today and thought my body is sagging." The words hung in the air. Light, but heavy at the same time. Amara tried to make it sound like a joke, but it came out with a trace of sadness. She looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Ethan didn't speak at first. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at her for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "maybe it's not sagging. Maybe it's just settling into the life you've lived." She blinked, caught off guard. "That's one way to put it. It's the truth," he continued. "Every line, every curve, every mark hits proof of everything you've been through. That's not something to hide." His words were gentle, but they carried weight. Amara didn't know what to say. She could hear the faint ticking of the clock again, louder now in the silence. "You make it sound poetic," she finally said. "Maybe it is," he answered, his smile soft and sincere. "You're a poetic Amara, even when you complain about gravity." That made her laugh a real laugh this time. It came out warm and genuine, filling the kitchen in a way that made Ethan smile wider. The kettle on the stove began to whistle softly. Amara stood up to pour more tea, and as she reached for the cups, he stood too, brushing past her shoulder. The small touch sent a sudden shiver down her spine, not uncomfortable, but unexpected. Their hands brushed for a brief moment as they both reached for the same cup. Neither pulled away right away. The hum of the house seemed to pause. "Sorry," she murmured. "No need," he said softly. There it was, again the silence. Not empty, but full. Full of something that neither of them wanted to name. They sat down again, both pretending nothing had happened. Yet both feeling everything had changed a little. "So," Ethan said finally, clearing his throat, "what's the plan for today?" "Same as always," she replied. "Work, chores, and maybe a nap?" "Sounds thrilling," he teased. "It's my favorite kind of thrill these days," she said, with a small smirk. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw it in his eyes. Something she hadn't seen in anyone's gaze in a long time. Admiration, respect, maybe even affection. The clock ticked again. Outside, a gentle wind rustled the leaves. Inside, 2 cups of tea sat between them, steam rising in slow curls that met halfway. Amara didn't know why, but in that quiet moment, the world felt softer. She didn't feel sagging. She didn't feel old. She felt seen, and for the first time in a long while. That was enough. The sound of the kettle faded, replaced by the steady heartbeat of the clock. Time, for once, didn't feel cruel. It felt kind. She looked at Ethan and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" He asked. "For making me forget," she said. He tilted his head. "Forget what?" She looked toward the window at the light dancing through the glass. "That the world keeps moving even when I don't." Ethan smiled gently. "Then maybe," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "it's time you started moving again." The scene ended with the sound of soft laughter, a spoon clinking in a cup, and the clock ticking on steady, patient, and warm. The rain came without warning that evening. Soft at first like whispers against the window pane, then slowly growing steadier, until the whole house seemed wrapped in its rhythm. The sound filled every corner, mixing with the low hum of the old refrigerator and the faint creak of wooden floors under Amara's feet. She stood near the window, holding a blanket around her shoulders. The sky was gray, heavy, and distant thunder rolled like slow breathing. Her reflection stared back from the glass, lonely, quiet, but not empty. "Just waiting," she sighed. It had been a long day at work, full of faces and voices that didn't really see her. The world outside her home always felt too loud. Inside, though, it was the kind of silence that could both comfort and crush. Amara walked toward the kitchen to heat some soup. As the pot warmed, she thought of Ethan. She hadn't seen him since the morning. He had left after that strange, half-serious conversation about age and beauty. The way he'd looked at her still lingered in her mind, gentle, curious, almost like he was seeing something she'd forgotten she had. The kettle whistled softly. She poured herself tea and wrapped her hands around the mug, closing her eyes. The warmth felt good against her palms. And then there was a knock. It was a slow, careful knock, not urgent, not random. 3 soft taps. She frowned, set the cup down, and opened the door. There he was. Ethan stood in the rain. Jacket half soaked, hair damp and falling over his forehead. He was holding a brown paper bag in one hand and smiling like he'd been caught doing something foolish. "Ethan," she said, startled. "What are you doing here?" "It's pouring." He shrugged. "I brought soup." Amara blinked. "Soup." He lifted the bag a little higher. "Homemade. My mom used to say, rain makes people lonely. I didn't want you sitting here alone with a cold bowl and sad thoughts." Her heart stuttered a bit. She wanted to say she was fine, that she didn't need anyone to check on her. But the warmth in his voice disarmed her completely. "You're impossible," she said softly. "Come in before you get drenched." He stepped inside, shaking off the rain, his boots leaving small wet marks on the floor. The air around him carried that scent she couldn't name, something clean, warm, and familiar. as he handed her the soup. She smiled. "You really didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "That's why I did." They both laughed quietly. It's a kind of laugh that fills an empty room and makes it feel alive again. Amara took out 2 bowls and poured the steaming soup. The scent of herbs and garlic drifted through the air. She handed him a bowl, and for a while, they just sat there, side by side, at the small kitchen table. Listening to the rain outside, there was something deeply peaceful about it, the steady rhythm of drops against glass. The soft clink of spoons, the low hum of the heater. Ethan broke the silence first. "You know, I meant what I said this morning." She looked up. "About what?" "About you," he said simply. "About how you shouldn't hide what life gave you. You call it sagging, but I call it proof you lived honestly." Amara didn't reply right away. His words brushed against something tender inside her, something she usually kept hidden. "You make it sound beautiful," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is," he said. "You just forgot how to see it." Their eyes met then, his steady and kind, hers unsure but searching. For a long moment, the only sound was rain. Ethan leaned back, sipping his soup. "You know, I used to come here to fix things. The porch, the fence, your doorbell. But I think you're the one fixing me." Amara blinked in surprise. "Fixing you?" He nodded slightly. "I don't talk much to people these days. Everyone's rushing somewhere. But here, it's quiet, real. Us." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I stay here so much. The world outside feels too fast." Ethan nodded. "Then we're both out of sync with the rest of them." The rain softened outside, and the lights flickered for a second. The moment felt fragile, like one wrong word could make it disappear. Amara placed her bowl on the table and looked at him carefully. "Ethan, why do you keep coming here?" He paused, then smiled in that small, honest way he always did. "Because you make silence feel less lonely." Her breath caught. She didn't expect that answer. She looked away quickly, pretending to wipe the table. "That's a dangerous thing to say," she murmured. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it's true." The air between them changed then. Not heavier, not awkward, just full. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning without needing words. A soft crack of thunder rolled in the distance. She reached to take his bowl, and their fingers brushed. Just a brief touch, but enough to make her heart beat faster. Neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the space between them again, as if the world was giving them a rhythm to breathe in together. After a moment, he stood. "I should go before the roads flood." Amara followed him to the door. The rain had slowed, but the air was thick with that earthy smell only rain leaves behind. He looked at her one last time before stepping out. "Don't forget," he said quietly. "You're still beautiful. Not because of how you look, because of how you see people." She wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come. She just nodded slowly. When the door closed, she leaned against it, listening to the rain again. But it didn't sound lonely anymore. She walked back to the table, still warm from where he had sat. She traced her fingers along the edge of his empty bowl and smiled. Outside, the rain eased into a light drizzle. Inside, a clock ticked softly, steady and calm, and though she didn't say it out loud, Amara knew something between them had changed forever. The quiet house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt waiting. Zitha rain had stopped by morning, but the air still smelled of it fresh, soft, and a little sad. The sunlight returned in shy streaks through the window, sliding across the floor and over the couch where Amara sat, a book unopened in her lap. The house was quiet, except for the steady hum of the ceiling fan. She hadn't slept much. Her mind had replayed every moment from the night before Thine's eyes. His words, the sound of his voice when he said, "You make silence feel less lonely." It kept echoing. Like a tune she couldn't stop humming in her heart. Her phone buzzed gently on the table. A message. "Ethan, can I stop by? Just for a minute." She hesitated, then typed back, "Sure." 5 minutes later, there was that familiar knock. 3 soft taps. When she opened the door, Ethan was standing there, dry this time, holding nothing in his hands. No soup, no tools. Just himself and that same gentle look that always made her forget the years between them. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. He stepped inside. The scent of rain still clung to him. The air between them felt both warm and uncertain. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said. "I just wanted to see you." She tried to smile. "You saw me last night." He gave a small laugh. "Yeah, I guess that wasn't enough." Amara looked away, pretending to fix the tablecloth. "You're bold this morning." "Not bold," he said gently. "Honest." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet stretched between them, filled only by the ticking clock and the faint rustle of the curtain as a breeze slipped through the open window. Then Amara sighed and sat down. "You know, I was thinking about what you said yesterday. About beauty, and about not hiding." He sat across from her, leaning forward a little. And she met his eyes. "You made me feel like I was still someone worth looking at." "It's been a long time since anyone made me feel that way." Ethan's smile faded into something softer, almost reverent. "You should never have stopped feeling that." "I did," she said quietly. "After my husband left, I stopped caring about how I looked. I told myself I was just tired, just older, just invisible. And maybe I liked it that way, safe, hidden." Her voice trembled a little. She hadn't meant to say so much. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened the way few people ever did. After a moment, he said, "You know what I see when I look at you?" Amara gave a weak smile. "Lines, I suppose." He shook his head. "Strength. And kindness. And a woman who still feels things deeply but is too afraid to admit it." His words caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. He leaned closer. "You're not invisible, Amara. Not to me." That last part landed like a whisper in her heart. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it pulsed. Amara looked at him carefully. "Why are you saying all this?" "Because someone should," he said, simply. "Because maybe you need to hear it before you forget yourself completely." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, she looked down, her voice low. "You're too kind, Ethan." "It's not kindness," he said softly. "It's truth." He reached out then, slowly, carefully, as if asking permission with his eyes. When she didn't move away, he took her hand. His touch was warm, steady. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull back. For a long moment, they sat there, two souls who had drifted too long in silence. Now finding words through the smallest touch, Amara whispered, "You don't have to do this." He smiled faintly. "No, but I want to." The sound of the clock filled the pause that followed. The moment felt suspended in time. "I used to play the piano when I was younger," she said suddenly. "Stopped after the divorce. Everything I loved just stopped." "Then start again," Ethan said. "Play something. Anything." She shook her head. "I'd sound terrible." He smiled. "I'll listen anyway." They moved to the small upright piano near the corner of the room. It was dusty, a little out of tune. Amara brushed her fingers across the keys, feeling old memories stir. When she played the first note, it sounded soft, fragile, but real. She played slowly, each key echoing through the quiet house. Ethan stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence as the song unfolded, broken but beautiful. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Not heavy, not demanding, just there. The music faltered, then stopped. She turned to him. "Why are you really here, Ethan?" she asked softly. He hesitated. Then he said, "Because somewhere between fixing your porch light and bringing soup, I started caring too much." Her heart skipped a beat. "You shouldn't say that." "I know," he whispered, "but I can't pretend I don't." Her breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak. The only sound was the faint hum of the fan and the echo of rain still dripping outside. Then, very quietly, she said, "Ethan." He looked into her eyes, and for a moment, neither of them belonged to time anymore. The space between them felt smaller, closer. Amara's voice broke the silence. Trembling, but sure. "You make it very hard to remember where the lines are." He smiled faintly. Then maybe they were never there to begin with. She wanted to protest, to stop him from saying more, but instead, she just closed her eyes. The air grew still. The music, the silence, the heartbeat all became one. And though neither said it aloud, something changed that night quietly, gently, like the world shifting by one breath. Zitha next morning came quietly, as if the world had tiptoed into daylight. The soft hum of the refrigerator blended with the faint ticking of the clock. Outside, birds were awake, but their song felt far away. Inside the small living room, Amara stood before the mirror still, silent, and lost somewhere between thought and memory. Her hair was loose, falling gently over her shoulders. The early sun filtered through the curtains, laying pale gold across her reflection. She traced her fingers along the mirror's edge, watching how the light caught every line on her face. It wasn't vanity that held her there, was curiosity. Who was this woman staring back? She didn't look sad. Not exactly. But she didn't look like the Amara she remembered either. Behind her, the wooden floor creaked softly. "You're up early," Ethan's voice said, gentle and familiar. Amara's heart gave a small start. She turned around slowly. He stood at the doorway, leaning against the frame, holding 2 cups of coffee. His hair was slightly messy, his shirt wrinkled from sleep. The sight of him, there so ordinary, yet so comforting, filled the room with something warm. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted quietly. He stepped forward, handing her a cup. "Then you and I are in the same club." Their fingers brushed as she took the mug. That simple contact sent a ripple of awareness through her. She pretended not to notice, staring instead at the steam rising between them. Ethan looked at her reflection in the mirror. "You've been standing here a while?" Amara gave a small smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. "About how time changes everything. Faces, feelings, dreams." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, time's got a cruel way of reminding us we're human." Amara studied herself again, the woman in the mirror suddenly seeming both strange and familiar. "I don't know if I like her anymore," she murmured. Ethan's eyes softened. "Then maybe you're not looking closely enough." She met his gaze through the mirror, their reflections touching before they did. "What do you see then?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He set his cup down on the dresser. "I see someone who survived heartbreak and still has kindness left. Someone who still wakes up and makes tea even when mornings feel heavy. I see strength and softness that most people never notice." His words landed like a quiet ring no one expected, but needed. Amara looked away, her throat tightening. "You make it sound beautiful," she said. "It is," he replied. Stepping a little closer, she could see him in the reflection now, right behind her. The air between them changed, gentle but charged. Like the moment before a storm that never comes. He reached up, hesitating for just a breath, then tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His touch was light, respectful, but her heart reacted as if he'd touched something far deeper. "You shouldn't do that," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Then tell me to stop." She didn't. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, the ticking clock slower on the mirror. Their reflections looked closer than they really were. Amara felt the weight of years melt for just a second. She wasn't thinking about her age or her body any more, only about the way his presence made her feel alive again. She spoke, barely above a whisper. "You make it hard to remember how to be careful." Ethan's eyes met hers in the glass. Maybe careful isn't always the same as right. A soft breath escaped her lips, halfway between a sigh and a confession. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, "we shouldn't." "I know," he said gently, cutting in. But knowing doesn't always stop feeling. Her reflection looked back at her, caught between fear and longing. It was strange how a mirror could show truth more clearly than words ever could. Ethan reached for her hand, slowly, deliberately. When his fingers touched hers, the world seemed to fall silent. The hum of the fan faded. The ticking stopped. There was only that moment, the warmth of his skin, the softness of his breath, the question in his eyes. Amara turned to face him, really face him. The closeness was dizzying. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of remembering what it feels like to be wanted." Ethan looked at her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Then remember," he whispered, "even if it's only for tonight." Her breath caught again. For a moment, neither moved. Then, as if guided by something beyond them, she leaned into his shoulder. Not a kiss, not a promise, just a quiet surrender. His arms came around her, slow and steady. They stood there in the golden morning light, their reflections touching in the mirror, a woman rediscovering her strength, and a man finding his peace in her silence. The moment stretched like soft music when she finally spoke. It was barely a whisper. "You know what happens next?" she said with a shy smile. He smiled too, eyes gentle. "I don't need to." Outside, a breeze pushed through the half-open window, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. Inside, 2 cups of coffee sat cooling on the dresser, and in that fragile, glowing quiet, the world seemed to pause, content just to let them exist like this, for the first time in years. Amara didn't feel broken. She didn't feel old. She just felt real, and somewhere deep down, she knew whatever came next, she would remember this morning for the rest of her life. The sun was high when Amara opened the back door, letting the golden light spill into her kitchen. The world outside shimmered with life, the gentle buzz of bees, the distant laughter of children, and the faint rustle of wind moving through the garden. It was one of those afternoons that made everything seem slower, warmer, and a little too honest. Ethan was already there, kneeling by the porch steps with a small box of tools. He wore a light shirt, sleeves rolled up, sun painting his arms with a soft amber glow. He looked up when she appeared, his eyes narrowing slightly against the light, but his smile easy and familiar. "You really didn't have to fix that step," she said. Leaning against the doorframe, he wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "You say that every time, and yet here I am." Amara crossed her arms, pretending to look annoyed, though the corners of her mouth betrayed her. "You'd just like an excuse to hang around." "Maybe," he said, his tone playful. "Or maybe I just like good company." The words hung there light as air, but heavy with meaning. She didn't reply right away, only turned her gaze to the garden, where sunlight danced across the leaves. "Do you ever miss the noise?" he asked suddenly. "What noise?" "The kind life makes when it's full. People coming and going. Conversations that never end. That sort of noise." Amara thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember how much peace there is in quiet. I used to think silence meant loneliness. Now I think it just means space to breathe. Ethan smiled at that, nodding as he adjusted one of the wooden boards. You always find a way to make something sound wiser than it should. I'm just old, she teased. You're not old, he said quickly. You're seasoned. There's a difference. Amara laughed, a soft and genuine sound that carried into the garden. Seasoned. What am I? Soup. He looked up, eyes gleaming. The best kind. Warm, comforting, and impossible to forget. Her laughter faded, replaced by a blush she didn't try to hide. He looked away politely, pretending to tighten a screw. But the moment between them pulsed with something quiet and real. After a while, brought out lemonade, the ice clinking softly in the glasses. They sat together on the porch, side by side, legs stretched out toward the sunlight. The wood beneath them was warm, the air scented with flowers and distant rain from the day before. It's nice, she said after a while. Having someone here. I almost forgot what that feels like. Ethan turned to her. You shouldn't have to remember. You deserve it. She looked at him, the sunlight catching the flecks of brown in his eyes. You always say things like that, she said quietly. Do you mean them? Every word. Silence again. Not the empty kind, but the kind that fills the air with heartbeat and breath. Amara leaned back, closing her eyes. The warmth of the afternoon settled over her shoulders like a blanket. Sometimes I wonder, she said softly, if we only find each other when the world has already taken too much from us. Ethan's gaze softened. Maybe that's when we're finally ready to see what's real. Her eyes opened, meeting his. And what's real to you? He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. Right now? You. This. The way the sunlight hits your hair. The way you laugh without meaning to. The way this house finally feels like it's breathing again. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She could feel her pulse in her throat, steady rhythm matching the faint hum of bees nearby. He leaned back beside her, hands folded loosely on his lap. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. I just wanted you to know. The wind shifted, lifting a strand of her hair across his shoulder. Neither of them moved to fix it. For a long moment. They sat there, two people on an old wooden porch, bound not by words, but by the strange, quiet comfort of being understood. Amara broke the silence with a smile. Do you realize you're getting too good at saying things that make people feel? He laughed softly. Then I must be learning from the best. She rolled her eyes. Flattery doesn't work on me. It's not flattery, he said. It's truth. Her laughter faded again, replaced by a look he couldn't quite read, half tender, half afraid. Ethan, you make me forget how to keep things simple. Maybe they were never simple, he replied, voice low. Maybe we just stopped looking close enough. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. The garden glowed. Their glasses sat untouched now, beads of condensation sliding down the sides. Amara looked toward the horizon. You know, sometimes I think life gives us second chances in strange ways. Ethan tilted his head. You think this is one of them? She turned to him, eyes warm but uncertain. I don't know. But if it is, I don't want to waste it by being afraid. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing hers where her hand rested on the step. The touch was light, so light she could have pretended it didn't happen. But she didn't. Her hand turned, meeting his halfway. They sat like that until the light began to fade. And the first crickets started to sing. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. You make the world feel new again. He smiled faintly, eyes on the setting sun. Then I'm doing something right. The day melted into twilight, and their hands stayed entwined. Neither wanted to move. Neither wanted to speak, and as the golden light slowly dimmed, Amra realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't just watching life pass by, she was living it again. Z-Night returned quietly, like a secret slipping back into the room. The house was dim except for the soft glow of a lamp near the old piano. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the faint hum of crickets blended with the sound of distant rain starting again. Inside, the world was small, warm, and alive with unspoken things. Amara stood by the piano, her fingertips grazing the dust on its polished wood. She hadn't played in years. The keys looked unfamiliar, now like strangers she used to know. Behind her, Ethan was pouring tea, the clink of cups soft, steady, comforting. "You used to play, didn't you?" he asked, walking toward her. She nodded without turning around. "Every evening. Back when the house was full of noise." He handed her a cup. "Noise can be a good thing." She smiled faintly, staring at the keys. "Sometimes. But silence has its own kind of music." They stood there for a moment, the sound of rain building outside. The room smelled of tea and old wood and the faint sweetness of lavender from a candle she'd forgotten she'd lit. Ethan set his cup down. "Play something. Anything." Amara shook her head. "I can't. My hands. They don't remember." "Then let them learn again," he said gently. "I'll listen." The way he said it soft but sure made her heart flutter. She sat down slowly, her fingers hovering above the keys. The first note was hesitant, small, like a whisper testing its strength. Then another followed, and another. The melody stumbled at first, uneven and fragile, but then something shifted. Her fingers began to remember. The sound filled the room, wrapping around them like a tender confession. Ethan stood behind her, watching in quiet awe. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Every note carried her memories, her regrets, her heart. After a moment, he stepped closer, so close that she could feel the warmth of him at her back. His breath brushed her shoulder as he whispered, "You're beautiful when you play." Her hands froze mid-note. The silence that followed was thick and delicate, balanced on a heartbeat. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Then tell me to stop." She didn't. The rain outside softened, falling in rhythm with the quiet pulse between them. She could hear it steady, gentle, like the sound of two hearts sinking to the same time. He leaned forward just enough for his fingers to brush over hers on the keys. "Play with me," he said softly. She hesitated. "I don't remember any duets. Then we'll make one up." His voice was low, almost a murmur. Their hands moved together, uncertain at first, finding a pattern between pauses and laughter. The music that came out wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, soft, imperfectly human. Amara laughed once when she hit the wrong note. Ethan chuckled too, the sound blending into the rain. "You're terrible at this," he teased. "Then stop distracting me," she shot back. "I'm not doing anything," he said. Leaning just a bit closer, "You're breathing too loud," she murmured, smiling. He grinned. "Then maybe it's your fault." The piano fell silent again. Her laughter faded into stillness. He didn't move. Neither did she. The room was filled with everything they weren't saying. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Ethan, this isn't supposed to happen. I know. It's wrong." "Then why does it feel right?" he asked, his voice breaking the air like a confession. She turned her head slightly, enough to meet his gaze. Their eyes locked, and the world outside disappeared. No thunder. No clock. No noise. Only them. He lifted his hand slowly, brushing his fingertips against her cheek. It was barely a touch, but it carried all the weight of what they'd been holding back. Her breath caught, her heart fluttering so loud it felt like a drum beneath her ribs. "Ethan?" She whispered, but her voice faded into his name. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. For a long moment, they stayed there close enough to feel each other's warmth, close enough to sense what neither dared to say. Then she looked down at the piano keys again. their hands still resting together on the ivory surface. "This is dangerous," she whispered. He smiled softly. "So is silence." The rain fell harder outside, tapping against the windows in soft rhythm. The lamp flickered, casting gentle shadows across their faces. She turned toward him fully now, her eyes glistening not with tears, but with something deeper. "Something alive. Do you ever think," she said quietly, "that maybe the things we call mistakes are just moments that happen too late?" Ethan's voice was barely a breath. "Maybe they're the only moments that matter." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she reached for the keys again and began to play slow, trembling, beautiful. The melody filled the room once more, but now it carried something new: warmth, longing, and quiet ache. Ethan stayed behind her, his hand resting gently over hers. Together, they played until the notes faded into silence, and when the final sound disappeared into the night. Neither moved. Amara exhaled, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "You know what happened next." Ethan smiled faintly, his hand still over hers. "I don't think we need to say it." The rain softened again, and the last candle burned low. Outside, the world slept peacefully. Inside, two souls sat in the soft afterglow of a silence that said more than words ever could. For the first time in years, Amara didn't feel empty. She felt full of warmth, of fear, of something dangerously close to love. And as the night deepened, the sound of their shared breath was the only music left. Zitha morning came softly, with pale light spilling through the curtains like a secret that didn't want to wake the world. Outside, birds called faintly, and the air smelled of rain-soaked earth. Inside, the house was quiet, so quiet that every small sound felt amplified. The soft creak of the wooden floor, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of fabric as Amara stirred beneath a thin blanket. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was filled with that gentle hush that only comes after something unspoken has happened, something beautiful, fragile, and impossible to name. For a moment, she didn't move. Her thoughts floated, slow and weightless, through flashes of the night before the piano, the laughter, the silence that had felt louder than any music. She remembered Ethan's warmth beside her, the way his hand had brushed hers, the way they had stopped speaking because words no longer knew what to do now. The house felt different, lighter, and yet, her heart carried a strange heaviness she couldn't quite explain. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Across the room, the piano keys caught the sunlight. Faint fingerprints still marked the surface, like proof that something real had lived there for a moment. The faint clink of cups came from the kitchen. Ethan was there. Amara hesitated for a heartbeat before standing. She walked barefoot down the hallway, each step soft, deliberate. The smell of coffee filled the air, familiar, grounding. He stood by the counter, back turned, humming a quiet tune she didn't recognize. He was still in the shirt from last night, sleeves rolled, hair slightly messy. The sight made her smile small and sad all at once. "You're up early," she said softly. He turned, startled for half a second before his face softened into a smile. "Couldn't sleep. The house creaks too much when it's quiet." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "You made coffee? Couldn't risk you starting your day without it," he said, handing her a mug. "You get dangerous without caffeine." She laughed quietly. "That's true." They stood there for a moment, side by side, sipping coffee in silence. The warmth of the drink in her hands steadied her, but her heart still felt like it was walking a narrow line between comfort and confusion. Ethan leaned against the counter, studying her face. "You've been quiet," he said gently. She looked down at her cup. "Just thinking about last night." Her breath caught slightly, but she didn't look up. "Yes." He nodded slowly. Me too. The sound of the clock filled the pause that followed, steady, patient, almost intrusive. Amara finally set her cup down. "Ethan, I don't regret what happened," she said softly, "but I don't know what it means." He looked at her carefully. "Maybe it doesn't have to mean anything yet." She frowned. "How can it not? You don't just share something like that and pretend it's normal." He took a step closer. "I'm not pretending. Then what are we doing?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist. "Maybe? We're just two people who found each other when we needed someone the most." Amara exhaled slowly, her eyes glistening. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "The world complicates it, not us." She looked at him for a long moment, his steady eyes. The soft crease of concern on his forehead. The kindness that seemed to live in everything he said. "I haven't felt this alive in years," she whispered. "And that scares me." Ethan reached out, brushing his hand gently against her arm. "Don't be scared of feeling alive, Amara. That's the one thing we're meant to do." She smiled faintly, blinking away the sting of tears. "You talk like a poet. You know that?" He chuckled. "A bad one. The kind that makes people feel too much," she said. He met her gaze again. "Then maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The silence between them, deep and not empty, but full of everything they couldn't say. Amara looked away first, moving toward the window. Outside, the world was still damp from the night's rain. A single sunbeam slipped through the clouds, catching the dust in the air. Turning it to gold, she spoke softly, more to herself than to him. "Do you ever wonder if we're too late?" Ethan took a slow breath. "Maybe. But I'd rather be late than never." That made her smile. A real one, this time gentle and warm, the kind that made her eyes soften. She turned back to him. "You're impossible. I've been called worse," he said. Smiling, they both laughed quietly, easily, as if the laughter itself was an agreement not to ruin what they had with too many words. After a while, she walked over to the piano and pressed a single key. The note lingered, pure and soft. "You know," she said, "I used to think silence was my punishment. Now I think it's where all the truth hides." Ethan stood beside her again, his voice gentle. "And what truth are you hearing now?" She turned to him, her eyes steady. "That I don't want to lose this, whatever this is." He nodded, no hesitation. "Then we won't." Her heart ached a little at how certain he sounded, as if he could will the world to stay still just for them. They stood together, side by side in the morning light, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air. The sound of that single piano note fading slowly into nothing. Amara placed her hand over his. "We can't go back," she said softly. "But maybe we can go forward differently." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "Then let's start there." The clock ticked again. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. The day outside began to wake, but inside that small house, time held its breath for one more moment, long enough for two souls to understand that whatever happened next, neither would walk through silence alone again. Zitha evening crept in slowly, as if it didn't want to arrive. The sky outside the window was a watercolor of fading orange and silver-gray clouds. The soft hum of cicadas rose from the garden, and somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled faintly through the valley. Inside the little house, everything was calm to calm. Amara stood by the window, watching the last of the sunlight disappear. Her reflection in the glass looked softer tonight, calmer. But her eyes carried that familiar glint of sadness that comes with knowing something is ending. She had felt it all day, a quiet heaviness behind every smile, every word. Ethan was packing his tools by the door. His movements were unhurried, almost careful, as if he was trying not to disturb the stillness that had settled between them. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. So, Amara said after a long silence, "You're really going?" He paused mid-motion, then turned toward her. "Yeah. The job starts next week. It's a good offer. Hard to say no." She nodded, keeping her expression steady. "Of course. You should go." Her voice was calm, but it trembled just a little at the edges. Ethan smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You make it sound like I'm leaving for another planet." Amara tried to smile back. "You might as well be. It's far enough." He walked over to her, standing just a few feet away. The air between them felt delicate, like one wrong word could shatter it. "I'll visit," he said softly. "Don't promise that," she whispered. "It'll hurt more when you can't," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You always know how to say things that break me a little." She turned away, pretending to straighten the curtains. "Then maybe I should stop talking." "Don't," he said immediately. His voice was low but firm. "Don't stop. Not with me." The silence that followed was filled with 100 things they both wanted to say, but couldn't. The kettle clicked in the kitchen, a faint reminder of normal life trying to continue in the background. Amara moved toward the counter, busying her hands with the small comfort of routine. She poured 2 cups of tea, just as she had so many mornings before. The scent of jasmine rose between them, sweet, nostalgic, familiar. She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing for the last time. He smiled softly. "You always make it too hard to leave." "Maybe that's the point," she replied with a sad laugh. They sat together at the table. The same spot where everything had begun, the same hum of the refrigerator, the same tick of the clock. But now the air carried something heavier, the weight of unspoken goodbye. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. She looked up. "Regret what?" "Us," he said quietly. "The nights? The piano? The things we didn't say." Amara shook her head slowly. "No, not even for a second." He smiled at that, relieved, but a little broken. "Then I can go, knowing I did something right." Her throat tightened. "You did more than that. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen again." He reached across the table, his hand finding hers. His thumb brushed gently against her skin, memorizing the feel of it. "You know, when I first came here to fix your porch, I thought I was helping you. But I think you're the one who fixed me." Amara's eyes shimmered. "Then I guess we both built something we didn't plan for." He nodded. "Something that matters." The clock ticked again, slow, patient, unaware. Ethan stood first. "I should go before it gets dark." Amara rose too, following him to the door. Her steps were quiet, her breath steady, even though her heart wasn't. He picked up his bag, then turned to face her one last time. "I'll miss this place," he said softly. "The tea, the silence, the way the light hits this window in the morning." "And you'll forget," she said gently. "That's how it works." He shook his head. "I'll remember. Maybe not everything, but enough to find you again in the small things. A song, a smell, a moment of quiet." Her smile trembled. "That's enough." He hesitated, then reached out and touched her face just once. His hand lingered there, warm and careful, as if trying to memorize her. She closed her eyes. "If I open them, you'll be gone." He laughed softly, his voice cracking. "Then keep them closed for a while." He stepped back. She felt the air change, the warmth leaving with him. The sound of the door opening filled the room. Then came his footsteps, fading down the path. When the door clicked shut, the silence that followed was deep, but not empty. Amara stood there for a long time, eyes still closed, listening. The distant hum of a car, the slow drip of rain from the roof. The echo of his voice in her head, each sound lingered like part of a song. She didn't want to end. She finally moved to the piano and pressed a single key. The note hung in the air, soft, pure, familiar. She whispered to the empty room. I said my body was sagging. But maybe my heart just learned how to stand again. The words drifted into the quiet, carried by the echo of the note. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not the sad, practiced kind she used to wear, but something small and true-born out of love and loss and acceptance. The kettle clicked once more. The clock ticked steadily on. Outside, the rain stopped completely. She poured herself another cup of tea, sat down at the same table, and looked toward the door. And though he was gone, the room still felt full of warmth, of memories, of something she couldn't name but could finally feel without fear. The story ended there. Not with tears, but with quiet peace. Just the sound of a spoon stirring in a cup. The whisper of the evening breeze through the window. And one heart steady, now learning how to beat alone again.